Someone actually showed up to their driving test in a golf cart. Another person handed the examiner a CVS receipt as valid ID. One guy fell asleep meditating before the car even moved, and these are not even close to the wildest ones on this list. We found 49 real, certified, gloriously dumb ways. People failed their driving tests before touching the gas pedal, and by number 32, your jaw will be on the floor. Subscribe, because if these people can get behind a wheel, you can at least hit one button and drop your worst driving story in the comments. 1. Riding a bicycle to an official driving test was already a concerning sign before anything else happened. The examiner stepped outside and found a fully grown adult parked at the curb with a printed email as evidence of a so-called hybrid test option the DMV had supposedly offered. The examiner read through it carefully and confirmed within seconds that it was promotional spam from a random website. The bicycle bell got rung once during the explanation, as if that somehow helped the situation. 2. Pulling out a library card instead of a learner's permit set a strange tone from the very first second. What turned it into something else entirely was the 4-minute argument that followed about why a library card with a photo on it should legally count as valid identification. The examiner was directly challenged to name one official reason it was unacceptable and genuinely could not answer fast enough. That pause was treated as a victory until the pre-check failure arrived shortly after. 3. Arriving at the DMV with a personal folding chair and a sandwich before the test was even called showed a certain level of commitment to comfort. The examiner came outside to find a fully grown adult already settled in, eating calmly like he was watching a football game. When told the test was ready, the chair got folded up slowly, the sandwich wrapper was tucked into a pocket, and the walk to the car happened with complete confidence, as if nothing unusual had occurred. 4. Spending 2 full minutes carefully adjusting the rearview mirror was actually an encouraging sign until the very next sentence came out. The teenager turned to the examiner with a completely serious expression and asked which one the rearview mirror actually was. The examiner looked at the mirror that had just been adjusted for 2 minutes and then looked back at the teenager waiting for a follow-up that never came. The test was paused before the engine ever got a chance to start. 5. Pulling up to the DMV with a giant Carnival-style steering wheel, where the original one used to be, was not the kind of vehicle modification examiners typically encountered. The explanation given was that the original steering wheel had broken, and something was needed to hold onto while driving. The examiner walked a slow circle around the car, taking notes before even opening the door. The Carnival wheel had a slight wobble when tested, and made a faint squeaking sound on every turn. 6. Walking straight up to the wrong car and spending several minutes trying to force a key into a lock that was never going to open was a rough way to begin an official driving test. After 17 failed attempts, the explanation offered was that the DMV parking lot had faulty locks. The actual test vehicle was parked 2 spots away with its hazard lights blinking. The examiner had been watching the entire time and had already started filling something out on the clipboard before a single word was spoken. 7. Forgetting a learner's permit at home would have been recoverable if what came next had not happened. The examiner was presented with a gym membership card, a Subway rewards card, and a CVS receipt fanned out together like a hand of playing cards with the explanation that between the 3 of them it was basically all the information needed. The examiner stared at the CVS receipt for a long moment before looking back up. The receipt was for shampoo and a pack of gum purchased the previous Thursday. 8. Climbing into the passenger seat and buckling up with full confidence was the kind of energy that should have gone into the driver's seat instead. The examiner sat down quietly and waited without saying anything for nearly 3 minutes, while the teenager sat comfortably buckled and ready to go. When the silence finally became impossible to ignore, the teenager looked left, looked right, and slowly realized the steering wheel had been on the other side the entire time. The rebuckle into the correct seat happened without eye contact. 9. Using the pre-test vehicle inspection as an opportunity to point out every single scratch, dent, and paint chip on the car was not what the examiner had in mind when the process began. Each mark on the vehicle received a detailed verbal description along with a personal theory about how it got there. The examiner stood quietly with a pen hovering over the clipboard as the commentary continued for nearly 9 minutes, covering the front bumper, both side mirrors, the rear panel, and a suspicious scuff near the fuel cap. 10. Arriving with the car already running and sitting in reverse was described as a time-saving decision made purely out of consideration for everyone's schedule. The examiner walked out of the building and watched the vehicle roll slowly and steadily backward into a nearby bush before deciding to say anything at all. The bush absorbed the impact with a soft rustling sound. The driver sat completely still inside, hands on the Carnival steering wheel, waiting for the test to officially begin as though nothing had moved. 11. Pulling out a printed PowerPoint presentation in the DMV parking lot before the engine was even started was not something the examiner had encountered in years of testing drivers. The document was titled, "Why I Deserve to Pass," and contained 7 full slides including a personal history section and a bar chart. The examiner was asked to take a seat on the car hood for the presentation and declined immediately. The test was canceled shortly after the second slide was mentioned. 12. Asking the examiner whether a quick FaceTime call could happen before starting the engine was already pushing boundaries before the reason was even explained. The boyfriend had apparently been waiting by his phone for 20 minutes wanting to watch the test live from home. The examiner explained clearly that no calls were happening during an official examination, and a follow-up question about sending a voice note update mid-drive was also firmly shut down before the key ever reached the ignition. 13. Reaching for the ignition and pointing a television remote at it with complete seriousness was the kind of moment that took the examiner a few seconds to fully process. The wrong rectangle had simply been grabbed from the dashboard out of pure muscle memory without a single moment of doubt. The button was pressed twice with increasing pressure before the realization slowly appeared on the driver's face. The actual key was eventually found in a jacket pocket while the examiner sat in complete silence throughout. 14. Handing the examiner an emotional support water bottle to hold during the pre-check inspection was unusual but seemed manageable, until the bottle was never asked back for at any point. By the time the inspection wrapped up and the test was ready to begin, the missing water bottle had become the only subject being discussed inside the vehicle. The examiner held it out twice without acknowledgement and watched a complete emotional spiral unfold in the driver's seat before the car had moved even slightly. 15. Spending 10 straight minutes arguing that seatbelts physically restricted natural driving instincts was a genuinely committed opening to an official road test that the examiner had not expected to sit through. The argument included personal driving experience, a supporting opinion from a cousin, and a detailed theory about how buckles interfered with the body's ability to react naturally in critical moments. When the explanation finally ended, the examiner simply pointed at the seatbelt without speaking and waited while it got put on with visible and lasting disappointment. 16. Nobody warned the examiner that opening the passenger door would be physically impossible due to what had been packed against it from the inside over what appeared to be several months. Fast food bags, a deflated basketball, 2 textbooks, a gym bag, and several weeks' worth of loose change had formed a solid wall against the door. The examiner stepped back from the vehicle and surveyed the entire situation quietly before a full unpacking of the passenger side had to take place in the open DMV parking lot. 17. Candles, small ceramic figurines, 2 crystals, and a tiny battery-powered fan had been carefully arranged across the entire front dashboard, with obvious personal meaning behind every single placed item. The examiner noticed the shrine from 15 feet away before even reaching the car door, and it only got more impressive up close. When everything was asked to be removed for basic visibility, the driver paused, picked up her phone, and called her mom for permission. The mom answered immediately and said no without any hesitation whatsoever. 18. Before the engine started or any official part of the test had begun, A folded document appeared from the glove compartment and was offered across to the examiner with a calm and serious expression. It was a typed non-disclosure agreement explaining that the driving style about to be witnessed was unique enough that it was not ready for public knowledge just yet. The examiner read the opening paragraph, handed it back without signing, and also declined the follow-up offer of a verbal agreement instead. 19. Bringing a dog to a driving test was already an unexpected choice, but the detail that genuinely stopped the examiner in place was finding the dog buckled into the driver's seat, wearing a small harness and sitting completely upright like it had been waiting for this appointment. Nearly 5 full minutes were spent unbuckling, relocating, and resettling the dog into the back seat before the actual driver could sit down. The dog watched the remainder of the pre-check from the rear window with quiet and undeniable judgment. 20. The engine had barely started before the Bluetooth connected without warning and filled the car with music loud enough to make the examiner's clipboard physically vibrate against the dashboard. The song that played was Baby Driver at full volume through all 4 speakers, and the driver immediately reached for the volume knob, missed it completely, reached again, and could not find it under pressure in time. The examiner sat holding the vibrating clipboard for 11 full seconds before officially calling the test done and stepping out. 21. The moment the examiner clicked his seatbelt into place, the driver turned with wide eyes and asked if this was actually happening for real right now. That question was followed immediately by a request to use the bathroom, despite having been sitting inside the parked car for 20 full minutes before the examiner arrived. The DMV building was walked back into slowly, while the examiner sat in the passenger seat, staring through the windshield at the parking lot and filling out notes that were not going to be positive. 22. Locating the parking brake should have taken 3 seconds but turned into a 5-minute standoff over what the correct name for it actually was. Every single time the examiner said parking brake, the driver nodded but refused to touch anything until the phrase emergency brake thingy was used instead, because that was the only version that felt familiar and comfortable. The examiner repeated the official term twice more with patience before eventually saying the words emergency brake thingy out loud in an official DMV testing environment, just to move forward. 23. Ski goggles were worn to an official driving test in the middle of July in Arizona, and the explanation offered was that they helped with focus during high-pressure situations. The prescription glasses had been left at home, and the goggles were described as a reasonable and practical substitute that served essentially the same purpose with added side coverage. The examiner looked at the goggles, looked at the clear sunny sky outside, looked back at the goggles, and wrote 3 separate things on the clipboard before the engine was even started. 24. During the standard pre-test question period, the examiner asked whether the vehicle was properly insured and received an answer that took a moment to fully land. The teenager sitting behind the wheel thought about it briefly, nodded slowly, and said emotionally yes with complete sincerity, as though that was a perfectly reasonable interpretation of the question being asked. The examiner looked down at the form, looked back up, and asked the question a second time using slightly different words to see if a different answer was coming. It was not. 25. Bringing a grandfather along to a driving test seemed harmless enough until the grandfather climbed into the back seat, got comfortable, and immediately began giving the examiner turn-by-turn directions to the nearest Denny's restaurant. The examiner explained twice that this was an official road test with a fixed route and that no detours were being taken under any circumstances. The grandfather disagreed and mentioned that the Denny's had a very good breakfast deal on Tuesdays. It was a Tuesday. The grandfather had clearly planned this in advance. 26. Every single mirror had been adjusted with real care and genuine attention before the test was ready to begin, and the examiner was almost impressed by the preparation on display. Then a pair of sunglasses came out, dark enough to block out most visible light, and were placed on the face with complete confidence. Within 4 seconds of putting them on, the driver announced that nothing was visible at all, and that the mirrors would need to be readjusted from scratch. The examiner watched the entire process repeat from the beginning. 27. Somewhere between checking the mirrors and adjusting the seat, the car horn went off accidentally and sent a sharp blast across the entire DMV parking lot. 3 people standing outside turned around immediately to see what had happened. The reaction from the driver was not to apologize or laugh it off, but instead to freeze completely and stare at the steering wheel like it had personally betrayed them. The door opened slowly. The driver stepped out onto the pavement and walked away from the vehicle at a calm, steady pace, without making eye contact with the examiner or saying a single word. 28. Walking into a driving test carrying a copy of the driver's manual covered in sticky notes, colored tabs, and handwritten margin comments suggested either extreme preparation or a fundamental misunderstanding of how the practical exam worked. The teenager settled into the seat and asked the examiner whether the road test portion was open book before holding the manual up with both hands to show it was available and ready. The examiner explained that driving a car through real streets was not an open book situation under any interpretation of that phrase. 29. The seat had not been adjusted before the test, and the driver was sitting far enough back that the pedals were completely out of reach, with no easy way to fix the gap quickly. The solution produced from the back seat was a pizza box, which got slid under both feet as a platform to close the distance. The pizza inside was still warm, and the smell filled the car immediately. The examiner looked down at the box, then at the pedals now being operated from on top of a large pepperoni pizza. 30. Before a single pre-check item had been completed or the engine had been touched, the examiner was asked directly what their star sign was and whether they were a Scorpio. The reason given was that driving alongside certain star sign energies created tension that affected performance behind the wheel in ways that were difficult to explain but very real and well documented online. The examiner confirmed no star sign information would be shared during off. 31. That horrible grinding noise coming from under the hood the moment the engine started was impossible to ignore from the passenger seat. Rather than addressing it or offering any explanation, the driver simply reached over and turned the radio volume up high enough to cover the sound completely. The examiner sat listening to both the music and the grinding happening underneath it at the same time. The driver patted the dashboard gently and said she is fine, she is just shy with complete sincerity. 32. Nothing about the pre-check had suggested any problems until the examiner reached for the passenger door handle, and the entire parking lot exploded into sirens, flashing lights, and a recorded voice shouting back away from the vehicle through external speakers. 9 full minutes passed while the deactivation happened across 3 different key combinations. The examiner stood beside the car, holding the clipboard against their chest, while nearby test takers watched from a distance. The appointment was rescheduled before the door was ever successfully opened. 33. Asking for a few seconds to meditate before beginning the drive was unusual, but the examiner agreed to wait and watched as both eyes closed inside the driver's seat. Roughly 90 seconds into the meditation, the breathing became deeper. The head tilted slightly to one side, and the driver fell completely asleep before a single pre-check item had been completed. The examiner said the name out loud twice before receiving any kind of response from the other side of the vehicle. 34. Positioned in the center of the dashboard was a handwritten sticky note in large letters reading, "Left is left," which had clearly been placed there with genuine intention before leaving home that morning. The examiner pointed at it upon sitting down without saying anything else. The driver explained calmly that it was simply a reminder for stressful moments when directions became confusing under pressure. The examiner looked around slowly and confirmed that this was in fact that exact stressful moment happening right now. 35. Printed turn-by-turn directions for the actual DMV test route had been sourced from a Reddit thread, laminated, and placed on the dashboard facing the examiner before anyone had even said hello. The examiner picked them up, read through the first 2 turns, and confiscated them without much explanation beyond a long, steady look. A formal request for a written receipt confirming the confiscation was made immediately with complete seriousness and was declined just as quickly. 36. The Bluetooth connected the moment the engine started and began playing a 47-minute podcast before anyone could reach the phone in time. The podcast was specifically about why traffic laws in the United States were unconstitutional, and the host had a very confident voice. The examiner listened to roughly 45 seconds before asking for it to be turned off. The driver reached for the phone and accidentally increased the volume first. The host had particularly strong opinions about stop signs. 37. Sitting down and immediately requesting a full practice run before the real test began was a bold opening move on a busy Tuesday morning. The request was for the same route, same conditions, and zero consequences attached to any mistakes along the way. When the examiner said no, a follow-up request was made for that refusal to be provided in writing with an official signature attached. The examiner stared for a long moment and then clicked the pen closed without responding. 38. The car was parked facing the wrong direction on a one-way street directly outside the DMV entrance, and the driver seemed genuinely unbothered when the examiner arrived with a look of quiet concern. The explanation given was that parking closer to the entrance saved time and showed practical thinking. The examiner pointed at the one-way sign visible from where they were both standing. The driver looked at it, nodded slowly, and said that was actually a fair point. 39. During the pre-check, the windshield wipers suddenly came on at full speed across a completely dry, sunny windshield after the turn signal was reached for and missed. The driver looked at the wipers, looked at the examiner, and made no move to turn them off or explain what had just happened. The wipers continued running throughout the entire pre-check inspection, while the examiner made several careful notes and the rubber squeaked steadily against the bone-dry glass. 40. Taped directly to the center of the dashboard was a hand-drawn speedometer, created on plain notebook paper because the real one had stopped working sometime in the previous month. The driver explained to the examiner that speed could be estimated fairly accurately through feel and experience alone without needing an actual functioning gauge. The examiner looked at the paper speedometer, looked at the real dashboard, and then looked back at the driver, waiting patiently for the test to begin with full confidence. 41. Somewhere between sitting down and reaching for the seatbelt, a full thermos of hot soup was produced from a bag and placed carefully in the cup holder like this was a lunch break and not an official government examination. The driver explained that nerves made them hungry and that eating beforehand helped with focus and performance under pressure. The examiner watched the soup get stirred slowly with a small spoon. The spoon had been brought separately. This level of preparation had clearly gone into the wrong part of the morning. 42. Halfway through walking toward the test vehicle, everything stopped completely. A finger pointed through the windshield at something visible on the route ahead. There was a hill, a small, normal, completely standard hill sitting on the designated test route. A formal request was made in the parking lot to reschedule for a route without elevation changes of any kind. The examiner looked at the hill, looked back, and confirmed that rescheduling for hill-related reasons was not an available option under any circumstances. 43. During the pre-check, the examiner asked for a horn demonstration, and the custom horn activated immediately, playing the opening 7 seconds of La Cucaracha across the quiet DMV parking lot. Several people turned around from across the lot trying to locate the source. The examiner made a note and asked for a second demonstration just to confirm what had been heard. It played again with the same energy. Whatever got written on the clipboard after that second performance took noticeably longer to finish than anything written before it. 44. Reaching for the gear shift during the pre-check was when the examiner noticed the original knob had been replaced entirely with a golf ball pressed firmly onto the exposed shaft. The driver demonstrated a smooth gear change to prove it worked fine as a substitute. The examiner examined the golf ball carefully, tested the shift twice with 2 fingers, and wrote something on the clipboard that the driver leaned slightly forward trying to read from the other side of the vehicle. 45. Rolling into the DMV lot behind the wheel of a golf cart with a small flag on the back showed a level of confidence that the situation did not fully support. Every box on the online registration had been filled out correctly, but not a single field had mentioned the vehicle needed to be street legal. The examiner walked a slow full circle around the golf cart before saying anything at all. The driver waited with genuine excitement for the test to officially begin. 46. Without any input from the driver, the GPS mounted on the dashboard activated the moment the engine started and announced that a U-turn should be made at the earliest possible opportunity. Instead of turning it off, the driver checked the mirrors and began reversing out of the DMV lot entirely while the examiner sat watching the building disappear. The GPS was following its own logic, and the driver was following the GPS without a single moment of independent thought applied. 47. Personalized license plates rarely stopped an examiner mid-stride, but these particular ones required a longer look than usual before anything else happened. The plate read "No Test" in large, clean letters and had been considered hilarious by the owner for several months since ordering it. The examiner disagreed with that assessment entirely and wrote the phrase concerning attitude indicator into the official pre-test notes. The driver was still mid-explanation about why it was harmless when the pen stopped moving on the clipboard. 48. Borrowing a pen from the examiner to complete the pre-test form seemed like a perfectly normal and reasonable request until what happened next unfolded in real time. The examiner's clipboard got flipped around and signed directly across the front in large, confident letters before being slid back with a smile. The words, "There you go, keep it," were delivered warmly, like a generous autograph had just been given to someone who had asked for one. The actual form remained completely unsigned on the other side. 49. "Go ahead and start," the vehicle was met with in a second from the driver's seat, and then a protein bar appeared from near the console. 3 slow, deliberate bites were taken, while the examiner sat in complete silence, waiting for something to happen. Each bite came with a thoughtful chew and a small satisfied nod directed at nobody in particular. Once the bar was finished and pocketed, the driver looked over and said, "Okay, I am ready now." The examiner had already begun filling out the result form. And just like that, 49 people proved that failing a driving test before touching the steering wheel is actually an art form. If any of these made you question humanity just a little bit, you are completely normal. Smash that like button, subscribe to BrainFumble, and turn on notifications so you never miss another beautiful disaster. Share this with someone who thinks they are a great driver. Now tell me in the comments, which one of these 49 legends do you think actually tried to rebook their test the very next day?